This video is on paragraph and flowchart proofs. This is actually going to be a much more difficult proof because of what it's asking us to prove. We always start with our givens and we always prove the triangle is congruent, and then we move on from there. So we're going to do a 2-column proof, a paragraph proof, and a flowchart proof, all of the same proof. So that means our proofs will actually look the same. It's just that they'll be in different formats. So I always start with the 2-column proof just so that I know what my statements are. So as always, we start with our first statements are our givens. There are no numbers, so I need to make sure I number them. So statement 1 is that segment MK is congruent to segment OK. And the reason 1 is that it's given. I need to go to my picture and mark that. So segment MK, so I put a tick mark on it, is congruent to segment OK. So O to K. I have it in my proof. I have it marked on my picture. It says it's congruent. I can put a check mark. Statement 2 says that segment KJ bisects angle MKO because it is given. Now, this does not say congruent, so I cannot mark it on my picture yet. I cannot put a check mark either. So what that means is that I need to still use my given to prove something else. So again, congruency, I can put a check mark. I cannot put a check mark yet. So because it says a word in here, I need to underline my word and then circle the next part. So I need to focus on angle MKO. Angle MKO. This is angle MKO. This is what I focus on. Bisect means to cut in half. What that's telling me is that this angle, this big orange angle, is being cut into 2 little angles. So I can actually mark that these 2 little angles are congruent. So when I go to here, statement 3, I have to use this. Bisect again means to cut in half. So I'm going to this angle MKO. I don't even care about this part over here. Angle MKO. Here's the angle that I'm looking at. This angle is being bisected, it's being cut in half. So you see how this part is going through the middle? That means that I have split this big angle into these 2 smaller angles. So I can actually mark an angle here and mark an angle here, because these 2 little ones have to be the same size, because that's what bisect means. It cuts it into 2 smaller parts. So I can actually say that these are congruent because of that bisect. So let's state them. I have to name that top purple angle. So if I cover up one of the triangles, I want K in the middle, because that's where my arc is. So I can name it any way I want to, as long as that K is in the middle. So if I start with M to K to J, so I would say statement 3 is angle MKJ is congruent to angle. Okay, so the hardest part is knowing how to name that second angle. If I went from M to K, I went from no arcs across the one line to the arc. So I have to go across that one line. So if I cover up this triangle, I have to go across this one tick mark. So the other letter that goes there is O. That has no arcs, across the tick mark to the arc. So I would say angle O to K, then across to J. So angle OKJ. Now why was that? It was because of this word bisect. If I underline that word, I have to put in my reason because of that bisect. So reason 3 is because I underlined that word bisect. I have to use the reason bisect. Now it bisected, what I circled was an angle. So I actually have to use the word definition of angle bisector. So I'm going to abbreviate that as definition, DEFN. I circled an angle, so I'm going to put the word angle, or the symbol angle, bisect. I have to use that word bisect. But I circled an angle, so I used the angle. I circled angle, I use angle. I underlined bisect, I use bisect. I did not touch KJ, so I don't even say anything about KJ in here. Nowhere in here does it say KJ, because I didn't even touch it. So I underline bisect, I use the word bisect. Circled a symbol of an angle, use the symbol of an angle. And all we did was went to that angle, MKO, and just split it in half. That's all we did with that. So I now have it in my proof that something is congruent because of the word bisect. I have it in my picture. I have the word bisect, and I've proven something congruent. Now I can put a check mark. Now we've used all of our givens. I have check marks on all my givens, but I only have 2 check marks. I only have 2 things marked congruent. That means I have to find a third thing. So that's when we go to our picture. So coming back to our picture, we have to find something else that we can say is congruent. These triangles are actually touching at an entire length. So that means that we should be able to mark that segment congruent because it's that entire length is together. So our reason for, we can go ahead and put this, we should know that that should be the reflexive property. So now all we got to do is just name it. So statement 4. So again, you only have to name it on that first triangle any way you want to as long as you name that side. So I can actually name this side JK because it's going along that side. So it's a segment. Segment JK is congruent to segment. That is a congruent symbol. So I went from, on here, no arcs to 1 arc. So 0 to 1. 0 to 1. Okay, so cover up the other triangle. I need that same pink part from 0 to 1. So 0 to 1. So I want to say J to K again. So segment JK is congruent to segment JK because of reflexive property. We have 1, 2, 3 things marked congruent. So that means we can prove triangles congruent. This first part is a segment, so I put an S. This doesn't say congruent in it. This one has congruent. This is an angle symbol, so I put an A. And this is a segment symbol, so I put an S. Now, this tells us we have 2 sides and 1 angle. That means, if we remember back from triangle congruence, this is the only way we can put 2 S's and an A together. So we have side, angle, side. So let's make sure. If we look at this first part right here, does this angle, if I were to outline this angle, will it touch both of the marked sides? If I outline that angle, it does. So that angle, if I have 2 sides, that angle has to touch both of the S's. So I can't put it out here. I can't put it out here, but I can put it in the middle because it will touch both of the sides. If I do the same thing here, I have 2 sides. If I outline this angle, will it touch both of the marked sides? So it touches both that blue side and that pink side. So yes, that angle, I cannot put it out here because that would only touch one side. I can't put it out here because that would only touch that one side. But I can put it in the middle because it'll touch both of the S's. So these are both side, angle, side. That means that we can prove triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. So statement 5 is, since we don't have it up here how the triangles are congruent, or to prove triangles are congruent, we still have to do it. So triangle, since I have an angle already named up here, I can actually name my triangle the exact same way we did our angles. So I can say triangle MKJ. So triangle MKJ is congruent to triangle OKJ. And the reason for that is because it was side, angle, side. Now, that is not what our proof says. That means we have to continue. Now, if you watch my CPCTC video, it was talking about if you had 1 extra step or 2 extra steps. This is a normal proof. You always prove triangles congruent. So you have to ask yourself, do we have to prove 1 extra step or 2 extra steps? It all depends on if this is a word or if it is an angle congruent to an angle or a segment congruent to a segment. Because it says a word, we actually have to do 2 extra steps. This is the hardest type. What we have to do is prove something with regards to the bisect. So we're going to have 2 extra steps. We're going to have step 6. We're going to have step 7. Step 6, the reason will be CPCTC. Statement 7 will be the exact same thing that our proof says, because that will always be our last statement. So we can go ahead and put segment KJ bisects angle MJO. And the reason for 7, because it says a word, because it says that word, it'll just be the definition of, if we underline that word and circle the next part, so we have definition of what type of bisect. So I circled an angle, so I have to put the symbol angle, and I have to use the word bisect. That is all information we can automatically write. The hard part is determining what we have here. This is where we have to pretend that we already have this. This is where we pretend that we already have this. We have to determine what is that extra third part. So we already have one angle marked congruent and two sides marked congruent. That means because of CPCTC, we can prove one additional side is congruent and two additional angles are congruent. But which one do we need? Because we don't want to have too much information. We need to find that one extra piece to say it's congruent. So what is it that we need? Do we need the extra side or one of the angles marked congruent? So that's when we go back to here. It says it's bisecting angle MJO. So this is what I want to focus on. I pretend that this is already happening. Angle MJO. So angle M to J to O. This is what I want to look at. This is what I want to look at. I want to pretend that this is already happening because that's what I need to mark congruent. This is where that comes into play. This is one of the 3 things that I could mark congruent because of CPCTC. I can name the third side is congruent, and I can name 2 extra angles are congruent. But which one do you need? Because I want to show that it's bisecting angle MJO, I need to prove that the 2 angles at MJO are congruent, because that's what bisect does. We're actually moving backwards. So this is angle MJO. I want to focus on that. If angle MJO is bisected, this will cut this bigger angle into 2 smaller ones. So I can actually use these 2 angles right here. Now I'm making it light there, I'm making it so that I can explain that this is what we need. So we actually have that angle MJK. Angle MJK is congruent to angle. If we started with M, I have to start with O. OJK. So it's congruent to angle OJK. And this actually is true because these 2 angles correspond to each other once we've proven those triangles congruent. This is that one of those 2 extra angles we can prove congruent. We can prove that these 2 angles are congruent because the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Now, if these 2 angles are congruent, that says that this bigger angle has been cut in half. That's why we're allowed to do that, because it's the definition of an angle bisector. Definition of an angle bisector states that it did cut the bigger angle in half to create 2 smaller ones. Since we already have those 2 smaller ones, that does show us that that was cut in half. On the paragraph proof, we're literally going to say all this, but just in words. So this will take a little bit longer because we do have 7 statements, so we're going to have a bigger paragraph. So on our givens, I always put just let. So instead of saying it's given, let segment MK be congruent to OK, to segment OK, and segment KJ bisect angle MKO. What we want to do now is, because that was our statements, our givens, we want to go into the proof, into this next statement right here. So we can say, because of the definition of angle bisect, we can say that angles MKJ and OKJ are congruent. We can say because of or due to, so I'm just going to use due to the definition of angle bisect. We can then go to the next statement, that segment JK is going to segment JK. So we could actually say that segment JK is congruent to itself. We can say because of or due to, any way we can say that. So due to the reflexive property of congruence. Going to that next statement, we have the triangles are congruent, so we can say triangles MKJ and OKJ are congruent because of SAS for side angle side. Then we can say CPCTC says corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. I don't want to have to write out all that. Those are letters and they represent an acronym. So we can say since CPCTC. So that really means since corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. We can say that angle MJK is congruent to angle OJK. Then we go to our last statement. That leads to our final conclusion, so we can say therefore, or in conclusion. Therefore, I'm just going to put the reason, by definition of an angle bisect, our segment KJ bisects angle MJO. Paragraph proofs can get very long, especially since you have to write out all the words. However, it's still the exact same things that we wrote in here. So that's why it's always good to write a 2-column proof so you know exactly what to write. And now we're just saying because of or due to. It's the same thing for the reason. We always say that reason. It's just now it's written out in words. So this still says the first two statements are together. It's just saying let, because that's our given. Then we go to the fact that we had bisect. We had to use that word. So we're going to use that word inside of here. And we just keep going with our 2-column proof, and we write in words. Now the flowchart proof on here, still using that same style. Our flowchart proof, I'm going to make it flow to the right. I always put my givens together in that same line. So I have 2 givens here. I'm going to put 2 boxes on this same line. And inside those boxes, I'm going to write my statements, my givens. So I know that segment MK is congruent to segment OK, because that was given. And then segment KJ bisects angle MKO, because that was also given. Now, I went ahead and put a check mark on MK is congruent to OK because it was already marked congruent. However, I had to underline and circle something for bisect. I could not put a check mark at the beginning. Since I had to write something because of this, that means that leads to something else. That means I have to actually lead this to another box. What does this lead to? If we go back, we had to write this purple part because of that word bisect. So that means that bisect led to something else. So KJ bisects angle MKO. That led to the fact that angle MKJ was congruent to angle OKJ. That was because of the definition of angle bisect. Now, I can stop that box. I can stop those once I have my check mark. Once I have that purple statement, that's when I could put my check mark. So that means I can stop that box right now. Now, moving on to that next statement, that was the reflexive property. Now, that did not happen because of the givens, because I already had check marks on my givens. So then that means that reflexive property, it didn't lead from the givens. But it also is not a given. So I can't put it over here from the givens, but I can't put it on the same line as the givens. So I kind of put it off a little bit underneath, but a little bit to the right, because it's not part of the givens, and it doesn't come from the givens. So it's on the next line down, but it's not on the same side with the givens. So inside of here, that was where I put that segment JK is congruent to segment JK, and that was because of the reflexive property of congruence. Reflexive property. That's when, once I had that one down, I had the 1, 2, 3 parts. So that's where I had my side angle side from. All of those 4 boxes ended up leading to my side angle side. So this was one of my sides, this was my angle, and this was my other side. So these 3 boxes actually lead to my triangles are congruent. So I can draw an arrow from each of these 3 boxes to my triangles are congruent, because that was what my next statement went from. We had the side, the angle, and the side all led to this triangles are congruent. This is where I would put the triangle MKJ is congruent to triangle OKJ, and that was because of side angle side. But we didn't finish. The CPCTC and the definition of angle bisect, these 2 parts right here, all came from because we have the triangles are congruent. This leads to, the triangles are congruent, leads to CPCTC, because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. That means I can lead, because of the congruent triangles, I can lead to CPCTC. So I can actually lead automatically to CPCTC, because the triangles are congruent. So that statement that we said in statement 6 was angle MJK is congruent to angle OJK. But that wasn't our final statement either. Because of the corresponding part, because of these 2 angles are congruent, we could actually lead to our final statement. Because these 2 angles were congruent, we had that final statement that we had the bisect. So we could say that segment KJ bisects angle MJO. And the reason for that was because of the definition of angle bisect. So flowchart proofs take everything that we had and it leads to the individual parts. So the given that had congruency in it didn't lead to anything else. Didn't lead to anything else being congruent. The word bisect had to lead to something being congruent. So that's why we had to go to that congruency part. Then once we had that congruency part, we could check that off. Then we went to that next part, the reflexive property, which was not part of our given, and it did not come from our givens. So that means that we could say it was off to the side, but it wasn't because of the givens. Once we had all three parts congruent, all three of these boxes led to our side angle side. That's why we have this box off to the side, because that's what we're trying to lead to, is that the triangles are congruent. If we can go further than triangles congruent, we do, but that leads from the triangles congruent. Once you have triangles congruent, that can automatically lead to CPCTC. If you have to prove a word, you have to use a CPCTC to prove that additional part. So a flowchart proof just flows and it shows where things come from. So bisect, that's why it came, this one was bisect because of the word bisect. Those two go together. These already had congruence in it, so that means that we didn't have to prove anything else from them because it already had congruency.